This episode is for the writer who is grappling with imposter syndrome. It happens to the best of us, and at least for me, that imposter syndrome led to a years-long creative famine where not only did I not write a single word, I also didn't even consider myself a writer anymore. This episode is going to get a little personal, but I'm sharing the surprising key that pulled me out of that spiral and got me writing again. So let's get started. You are listening to the Memoir Method podcast, the place for writers, readers, and anyone who appreciates the collective power of our stories. In this podcast, we explore the impact of memoir alongside an examination of writing techniques and strategies used in the genre. Whether you are a writer looking for inspiration and guidance or a passionate reader seeking meaningful connections through shared experiences, the Memoir Method podcast is your go-to conversation spot. I'm your host, Charlotte, editor, writer, and the heart behind Charlotte Writes. Let's get started. About 10 years ago, I kept up a regular personal blog and had a robust readership of thousands. By that point, I'd been writing on this platform for about 10 years. And then I had my second child. The delivery of my daughter was traumatic, and it ignited severe postpartum anxiety. I was angry all the time, I was overwhelmed, and I did not feel like myself. And the worst part of this is that I didn't even recognize this disintegration of my sense of self for about a year. It took a long time for me to be able to get diagnosed and get professional help. One of the first things to disappear in this season of my life was my writing. And it wasn't just that I didn't have time or energy. I stopped having any creative flow at all. My writing completely stalled out. This piece of me that had been such a core part of my identity for as long as I could remember had just turned off. And when the mental health challenges continued, even after I was diagnosed officially, I had stopped calling myself a writer at all. So me, the person who had been writing for as long as I could remember, who had written essays, submitted work to magazines when I was a teenager, even had a notebook in elementary school that said private, do not read, where I kept my short story drafts. That version of me was gone. And after a year of this deep postpartum anxiety, I no longer even felt that I could call myself a writer. So even as I got into some more recovery and did start to feel more like myself, I never felt like I could access that part of me anymore. And so this mindset continued for years, and my ideas for writing had gone from a flood back before this pregnancy and delivery, a flood of ideas to a stream to a trickle, and eventually these ideas stopped coming in altogether. So what had started off as imposter syndrome became a decay of my identity. I had stopped waiting for inspiration, and I was actually grieving a part of myself that I truly believed had vanished forever. I didn't think that I deserved to call myself a writer anymore. Many creative writers believe that their writing identity expires if they don't produce. And I see this with memoir writers especially. If you get into a rut, then it becomes harder and harder to show up again. And then what may have started out as a simple writer's block will morph into imposter syndrome, which evolves into a complete identity crisis, like what I experienced. You'll likely have some experience with one or all of these levels of the writer's life, whether that's a simple writer's block, that imposter syndrome, or even that loss of identity. My job as your editor, though, is to help you stop the spiral from writer's block into imposter syndrome so that you never even hit that identity crisis. That's my job as your editor, is to be that support, not only to make sure that you're writing what you are meant to write and say what you want to say, but also to help your head and your mindset stay in that writer space, to help you really feel like that writer, to help you embrace that identity. And I know that it can be hard to take yourself seriously as a writer, but I'm going to share what brought that reality back for me, because it did come back. And if I could go back to the version of myself 10 years ago, I have so many things that I would tell her, and I would tell her that it all works out. So here's where my pivot point was. I found myself on the editorial staff of a small magazine. And how I ended up there is actually a great story all on its own, but I will share that another time. I was meeting with the editor-in-chief of this magazine, and he said, "You'll be coming on as a contributing editor, which means that we expect you to contribute your own writing." At first, I felt like a deer in headlights because no one had expected me to produce publishable writing in a very long time. I had thought that I could join this creative team in a solely editorial capacity. The editing felt safe for me. I'd actually started this editing business a couple years before I joined this editorial staff. And editing felt safe. I knew what I was doing. I knew good writing when I saw it, and I knew how to make others' writing improved and polished and saying exactly what they needed it to say. I shouldn't trust myself to do that for me, right? So me feeling that editing was the safer option was really an indication I was hiding some of my own fear about my own potential or lost potential. And I wanted the proximity to the writing and the creativity without exposing myself to its vulnerability as someone who would have to do that themselves. And very quickly, I realized that this would not be the case in this space. After a quick flash of fear, I realized that this was actually the opportunity that my ego needed to take myself seriously again as a writer. I was not going to pull myself out of that identity crisis on my own. It actually took someone coming in and expecting me to be that version of myself again. Like, this editor-in-chief didn't even know what he was actually doing for me, but it was so essential in me being able to access this version of myself again. So looking back, here's how I see this breaking down and how it actually worked in the background for me. This magazine staff already assumed that I was capable, and that assumption became a mirror for me. I realized that what I had believed was an unworthiness trap. I don't deserve to do this. I am not this person anymore. That was actually just some creative fear and some rusty creative wheels. I was, for the first time in such a long time, accountable to someone else as a writer. And that woke me up. So slowly but surely, my writing identity turned back on. I started noticing different essay ideas. I started paying attention to my life differently in the way that I paid attention back when I wrote all the time. Turns of phrase would come to mind. I started to note my notes app with ideas and phrases. I started writing poetry for myself. All of these small pieces of my identity started coming back. And it all started because someone else expected it to. And that led me to expect this for myself. Accountability is what gave me permission to take myself seriously. It gave me permission to discard that belief that wasn't serving me anymore, that I wasn't a writer anymore. It gave me permission to reclaim that for myself and reintegrate that skill set and that talent and that vision back into my life. The shadow side of accountability is that maybe you don't really believe that you can do what's expected, and so it actually adds on overwhelm. If that's you, then my invitation is for you to switch how you see accountability. I want you to look at being accountable to someone else for writing as the universe's sign that you can create what you want and that you can be the kind of person who writes and publishes their memoir. The shift I want you to make if you feel this way is, what could I write now that someone knows that I can? What can I write now that someone knows that I'm capable of this, knows that I can do this? And I know what it feels like to be afraid that you're too late or that you've lost your edge. Again, I spent actual years in this space. What changed my own narrative as a writer was being expected to show up as one. If you're feeling out of your depth as a creative writer, maybe your missing ingredient is professional support that can not only teach you and be a support, but also expecting you to produce. With my clients, I expect them to do the work and come back to me when it's ready. I expect them to send me, hey, this is what I've worked on in the past month. Like, there's an expectation there. And if they don't send it to me, I reach out to them and I say, hey, what have you been working on? Hey, what can I look at? Like, there's an accountability here. I show up for you and I expect you to show up for me, and you do every time. So you're not undisciplined. You're not even uninspired. You might just need a space where you feel supported and called in so that you can elevate. I want to show you another way of looking at this through the example of some writers that I've worked with. Many writers who come to me did not consider themselves writers before they decided to write their memoir. That's something that's kind of fun about memoir writing, is that it is a desire that activates, and then you, even in your 50s, 60s, realize, oh, I want to write my memoir, which means I get to learn how to write. And so that is where many writers come to me in that space. But after being in proximity to me and my other spaces, I'm an editor and publishing professional who knows how this process works. I know how to coach you. What happens is that even if you have a hard time considering yourself a writer when we start working together, when you're in proximity to me, your voice locks in and your creativity clicks. This happens with so many writers. This happened with the writer I worked with last year, especially. The more time we spent together, the more she saw herself as someone who has something to say and as someone who can write it. So before long, she was bringing me revisions where at first it was like, I don't know about this. I don't know what I'm doing. And truly within a few sessions, a few calls, she was bringing me revisions and saying, Charlotte, this is really good. I feel really good about this. And it was. She should feel good about it because her writing was improving and she was being a writer. Who you are as a writer has so much more to do with how you show up rather than what you can produce in a single writing session or even, a single project. For me and for so many of my clients, that identity is unlocked when someone else expects it to. So there are so many ways to feel like a real writer. But you don't have to wait until you publish. Actually, you probably will never publish if you are waiting for that milestone to feel like a real writer. Side note, you don't even have to wait for that confidence to kick in for you to feel like a real writer. Because sometimes your confidence is going to waver. But a shortcut that actually works so effectively is to put yourself into spaces and around people who treat you like a writer and expect you to show up as one. I can support you and give you proximity to this energy and accountability in several ways. You can start by watching the Memoir Breakthrough Training if you want to understand why you haven't been able to make progress that you know that you're capable of. This is the training where I break down what I call the rewrite loop, which explains why you are stuck in the same set of rewrites, why you go back to the same chapters, why you are still working on this memoir years after you started. And while working on a memoir, creating a memoir does take time, it doesn't have to take as long as you think it does. And I explain all of this in this free training. I'll include the link to access that in the show notes. It's instant access. I'll send it straight to your inbox. You can also join the Memoir Method waitlist. The Memoir Method is my cohort style of program. This is part coursework, part coaching, part editing container. So we recently kicked off the winter cohort of the Memoir Method, and already the breakthroughs that are coming through for my clients are incredible. This is a space where accountability, clarity, and identity merge together. It's a container that calls you forward into the writer that I know you can be. The spring cohort for the Memoir Method kicks off in April, so you can head to the waitlist to be the first to know when enrollment is open. And waiting list writers will also have extra opportunities for support if they join the spring cohort from the waiting list. Lastly, please feel free to DM me on Instagram anytime. You can find me on Instagram at the.memoir.coach. And I love to hear about where you are at in your writing, what you are struggling with, what you want, where you feel stuck. And I love connecting with you through DMs. I love hearing from you and what you are working on. I love making connections with you there. So please feel free to find and follow me there. Send me DMs. I love to talk to you there. You are not too late. Your writing identity is not gone. Even if it feels wobbly, this is something that you can practice and really lock in. And once you feel like a writer and once you have someone who expects you to show up that way, it becomes easier and easier. Consider me your friend, your editor who is expecting you to show up. I'm expecting you to show up for yourself and for your story and for your readers. This version of you is needed. Your story is needed. Your conversation is needed. Thank you so much for joining me. I cannot wait to see you next Friday, and I'll see you then. You've just listened to an episode of the Memoir Method podcast. The Memoir Method podcast is presented by Charlotte Writes. If you liked what you heard, the best way to support the show is to subscribe through your preferred podcast player. And if you're feeling especially inspired, I'd love it if you left a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Leaving a review really does help other readers and writers like yourself find the show. If you want to continue the conversation, you can find me on my website at charlottewrites.co or on Instagram at Charlotte Jane writes, "Thank you for tuning in. I'll see you next time. And remember that you have a story that matters."